بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الذي بعثه الله تبارك وتعالى نبيا وهديا إلى صراط المستقيم، فنصلي ونسلم عليه على الدوام، والصلوات عليه الأمر في القرآن، ومحبة النبي من علامات الإيمان. أما بعد. So we continue, inshallah, with our study of the book Healthy Relationships, and we're in chapter 3. We're in the section that is dealing with accepting and sharing opinions. And last time when we met, we were talking about the importance of shura, or mutual consultation, and how this is a Quranic principle, and we were talking about how this is a chapter which overlaps with the Quranic concept of shura. This book, the way that it's written, is written as an outline. So sometimes there's certain areas in the book which could be better developed. But it is written in a language which is easy to understand, and it at least gives us a basic framework to work from. The idea of accepting and sharing opinions, it needs from us a certain degree of discipline. It needs from us a certain degree of discipline. And the things that need firstly to be understood, aside from us being disciplined, from what angle? Aside from the issues that we're going to talk about, we need to return back to the point of discipline. Because we're going to talk about some ideas that govern conversation and exchanging of opinions, but we always have to have that discipline of listening. We always have to have that discipline of listening to the other person. If we're not listening to the other person, the idea of exchanging opinions doesn't matter much. So that's a big issue. If we're not, we have to come back into the mode of active listening. And that was the first chapter that we dealt with. If that's not present in our relationships, we can ask for our opinions to be heard. We can force our opinions, all of that, and we just create more and more damage in the relationship. The issue of actively listening to the other person, where they're clear that you're there, that you're understanding where they're coming from, you're understanding their feelings, you're understanding their ideas, their position. Doesn't mean that you always agree, but they should be very clear that you are understanding them. And we'll come back to that point with a little more detail. Accepting and sharing opinions, it needs some things from us. It needs for us to have the mindset that we are aware of where the other person came from, their background, their education. Background meaning their family background, their experiences, their education, their economic situation, the work realities that they're in. All of that is important to understand how it is that people are feeling and thinking about things. Sure, people have their own individual ideas and concepts about things, but many times we're shaped by our background, by our culture, by our family background, by the neighborhood that we grew up in, by our educational process that we went through, by our life experiences, by the age group that we're in, by the economic situation that we were in, and by our work, of course, because work, it takes up so much time that it's bound to influence many of us. Sometimes to the negative, sometimes to the positive, sometimes it's a mixed situation, but the work environment, there's no doubt that it impacts us. That's not to mention friends and so on and so forth. But we have to understand that background. One of the things that comes up is the personality differences that we have amongst each other. Those differences that we have when we engage each other, right? Our personalities, we have to understand how they operate. It doesn't mean because we have different personalities, it doesn't mean because we have different backgrounds, different levels of education, we came up from two different economic situations that there can be no relationship. It means that if we're going to attempt to build a marriage, if we're going to attempt to maintain a marriage, we have to understand those differences. That's the issue of compatibility. Well, one of the things that I've noticed in my basic studies when the ulama they talked about the issue of compatibility, the ulama meaning the scholars of Islam, mostly the scholars of fiqh, compatibility is one of those issues that's looked at as a prerequisite for marriage. Usually, people were talking about the same background, the same economic base, the family, this, that. But when it came to the issue of personality, that's something that they didn't talk about. Another thing that they talked about was the issue of religious orientation. That's we don't talk about that in today's time. They talked about that, but they didn't talk about psychological differences, personality differences. They kind of just went with the general, whether they're from the same class type of group and the same education, where the family status, that's kind of what they went with. But the deeper part that we suffer from today that impacts us is the personality differences. They did talk about religious orientation. Why is this all important? Because if we're talking about accepting and sharing opinions, we have to realize where the other person is coming from. And we just went through the chapter that was dealing with the issue of conflict. And maybe it was better that she talked about this, accepting and sharing opinions, before she talked about conflict. But that's an issue of how the book was organized. First, talk about, it was better to talk about first how to model healthy communication before getting into the issue of conflict. But where we're at in society is mostly everybody's involved in conflict. So in order to get beyond conflict, we have to learn how to deal with it so that we can get to a point where we can accept and share opinions. Maybe that's her logic, Allahu Alam. But I appreciate her work in any event. But religious orientation, meaning how you understand the deen and at what level you want to practice and so on and so forth, that's important for the Muslim. That's something that is not going to be spoken about in many circles of counseling. That's why Islamic counseling is extremely important. It's important for imams, it's important for social workers, for community leaders to know how to do some sort of counseling grounded in Islam. Because if we can't do that for each other, we can't expect the professionals to do it. Although they have some professionals, they have multicultural sensitivity training. So they have a general understanding of how to deal with religion. But we have to remember that we live in a time period where there's many people that don't believe in any kind of religion. You're better off going to a Christian counselor in some cases than going to a counselor that has no basis. If you go to a counselor that's a Christian and that person is not necessarily open-minded, you may be better off going to a person that doesn't even believe in religion, but is fair and so on and so forth. And that's the confusion that is in counseling. Who do you go to? Who do you trust? That's why the solution in the long term is for us to be able to develop counseling models. And that's already happening in the country, alhamdulillah. But Islamic counseling is important. But Islamic counseling has to be rooted also in the best insights and theories that are coming from the discipline of counseling itself. That's important. And that wasn't an issue in the past. That was not an issue up to this time period. In Al-Andalus and other places like that, We always were at the forefront of knowledge as Muslims. And civilizational ideas, we were the ones that pushed the civilization ideas, but we fell, we declined. That's all. In any event, that's to say that what kind of mind do we need to go into our relationships with? We need to understand people's backgrounds. We need to understand how those things affect us and how they affect our decision making. We also have to be ready to change and grow. That's the most difficult issue that we have. Accepting and sharing ideas, it is in many ways about agreement, and in many ways about change, in many ways about growing, about bringing to the fore a problem that may be there, or organizing. How can we be at the highest level is what we should be looking at in our relationship with ourselves and with our families. So there's a lot of things that I wanted to say that about that. Some opinions, when we're sharing and accepting opinions, we have to realize some opinions, some issues are beyond us. Like if we're going to be talking about doing an addition to the house, or where we should buy property, that's just not a basic opinion. That needs an expert insight. If we're talking about a surgery, you see what I'm saying? That is beyond, beyond the average person's understanding. You may be able to, today's time creates an issue because people are like, I'll look on Google. Okay, fine, that's fine. But you have to realize that when you're accepting, you're sharing opinions on that type of issue, you may have some understanding because you may have friends that are doctors, you may do research, but you also have to realize that that's not your field. So yes, you may have some ideas, yes, you may have good insight, but that's not your field. The same thing with certain things about education, the same thing with certain things about buying property or investing money or anything like that. So we have to be able to analyze what is it that we are sharing and what is it that we are accepting with regard to opinions. Are we sharing ideas? Because I know some people that any idea they're shared, they automatically become the expert and they start fighting over that. And they're not the expert. And I'm not saying you have to be like an expert, like you have to have a degree and licenses. I'm just saying that you have to realize you have a limitation in knowledge. Because there's certain people that they read and read and read and read and read and study, and they become very knowledgeable in that area. So I'm not saying you have to be like a mutakhassis, yani, in the professional sense of the term. You could be cultured, and that's the point that I want to get at. Muslims should be cultured. One of the qualities of the Muslim is to be cultured, to develop themselves, so that when you share opinions and when you're accepting opinions, you're sharing opinions and you're accepting opinions based on knowledge, based on your rootedness in the deen. If you're weak in your understanding of the deen and you're weak in life and understanding life, that accepting and sharing opinions, it may be nice, but what are you going to do with that? You see what I'm saying? You get the idea. That point is clear or no? So we look at the background of each other to understand where we're coming from. Then we also have to realize that our ideas that we're sharing, our opinions that we're sharing, at what level are they? Don't share ideas and opinions and you want to force your point and you didn't even study about that point or understand your point, right? We should go into discussions wanting to learn. Well, let's look into that. You see what I'm saying? Let's develop ourselves more with that. That's a good idea. And we have to realize that that's another issue. The issue of valuing each other. Sometimes you just let the person express themselves. There's no issue. You may not agree, you may disagree. Sometimes you go along with the person. That's about creating an environment where you feel comfortable with sharing opinions. See what I'm saying? Give the people a chance to speak. Give the person that is your intimate the chance to speak. So that's why I said we have to have a certain type of discipline. How we're looking at each other and so on and so forth is extremely important. There's a few things that I wanted to mention in that regard. When you see the other person, when you see the other person, right? When you're dialoguing with the other person, you're conversing with the other person. The question is, how do you see them? Do you give them value? Do you honor them? How do you think about them? How do you feel about them? How do you feel about when they speak? That's important. Because if you're negating the other person, if you don't give the other person any space, if you don't allow the person to share their ideas, if you never go along with the other person to implement their ideas or to take their opinion seriously, how do you think that person is going to feel? Yeah, or ignored, negated, whatever it may be. That's why valuing each other is important. That's why also we also have to know our space. Some things we just don't know what we're talking about. So some things I can't really share an opinion on because I don't know. I may have to learn about it. You see what I'm saying? So we have to know we have to differentiate, we have to make a difference between something that's done like about cleaning the house on a basic level or something that is going to be opinion is going to be shared on the issue of what school do the children go to, or like I said, major issues like a surgery or this that. There's different levels of sharing opinions and giving opinions, but we have to value each other regardless. You have to, how do you see the person, even if they say something that you don't agree with or you think is not very knowledge based, but the person can be coming from a sincere place. Do you honor that? You know what I'm saying? Do you value that they're at least trying? It's sometimes it's about allowing the other person to just be heard. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the point that we have an idea that comes from a hadith or from a saying. من لا يشكر الناس لا يشكر الله. The person that doesn't show thankfulness to people doesn't show thankfulness to Allah. So that's where we get the concept of gratitude. We're trying to inject some Islamic principles here. We should inject some Islamic principles into this idea of how we're sharing opinions. So first of all, it's like being grateful that you even have a partner, being grateful that that person is in your existence, being grateful, being thankful that that person is in your life. When you have that attitude, you value the person. Unfortunately, some of us don't know what it means to be a widow. Unfortunately, some of us don't know what it means to be divorced or be single. You understand what I'm saying? And so we don't value people in the same way. Some of us don't know what it means not to have friends or not to be understood. So the first thing is to show gratitude, to be thankful that that person is in your life. That changes the whole idea of how it is that they share their opinions. If you don't value the person, which many people do that. Many people have friendships and they're not real friendships. It's about what can I get out of you, or I keep you close because there's benefit that I get from you. But it's not a real friendship. And so that attitude, you can't carry that attitude into a marriage. And when I counsel, I see too many people, they confuse the business model for what it is to be in a marriage. So they're in the process of everything's business negotiation. You know what I'm saying? What can I get with giving the least? That's not a marriage. So the gratitude is important. The other thing is honoring the person, because Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has told us لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. يعني كرامة الناس شيء مهم. يعني the honor of a person is something that's important, extremely important. When we don't honor the person, When we don't show gratitude, it's easy for us to curse the person out. It's easy for us to do things that hurt the other person. It's easy for us to write the other person off. It's easy for us to treat the person like an object. It's easy to dominate the other person. And we have the hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. We don't take that into marriage. That your iman is not complete until you love for your brother. And here you can say sister as well, what you love for yourself. And husband and wife should always have that in mind. So when we talk about compatibility, we don't want to just stay stuck on how much money do you have and what background do you have and what family that you have. Where did your family come from? This, that. We want to have some values of how it is that we look at each other. Regardless of how much you practice, one person can be into Hajj, the other person can finish the Quran in 3 days, the other person barely reads Quran, but they're good. We have to have these values. That's what makes a Muslim marriage a Muslim marriage. And we have to understand, Wallahu fi awni al-abdi ma kana al-abd fi awni yani akhihi. That type of concept that we find it in the 40 hadith. That the help of Allah, the support of Allah comes to us when we support each other. And we have that command, تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان. تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان. That's an important thing that has to be kept in mind in marriage, because too many people are in war mode in marriage. Support each other, aid each other, help each other, not just cooperate. The meaning aun is very deep meaning. Support each other, help each other, aid each other, cooperate in good. And good or goodness has levels. That which is commanded in the Sharia and is very clear, or commanded in the Quran and the Sunnah, and that which goes beyond the basic commandments. That's why that relationship concept doesn't work, that I'm just giving just enough, and I'm trying to take out as much as possible for myself. You know what I'm saying? That greed concept, it doesn't come, it has to flow. The love and the giving has to flow, but what happens is when the love and the giving flows and it's not reciprocal, people burn out. And it doesn't have to be equality. People make that mistake. They think it has to be always mutual, 100%. That's impossible. Sometimes in life, one person in the relationship is giving more than the other person. Like, for instance, if one person gets sick, really terminal illness, and they're in bed and they can't do anything, and the other person is supporting the family and they're taking care of the person, how are we going to talk about equal actions in that relationship? You know what I'm saying? So we have some misunderstandings about what mutual investment in the relationship means, and we have ideas of equality that sometimes are very weird. You understand us? We have equal dignity, but it's not always going to be 100%. That we are at the same level in the relationship. What we have to understand is that what has to be constant in the relationship is the issue of gratitude, the issue of honor, the issue of valuing each other, mutual respect. But sometimes if you're hit with depression, you can't be in where you're at in the relationship psychologically. You may not be there 100%. And so what do you say, that now we're going to get a divorce? You know what I'm saying? I'm sick. So now you're going to divorce me because I'm sick, or I lost my job. Now it's time for a divorce. And unfortunately, that is how some people function. They don't know how to deal with crisis, and so on and so forth. So those were some points that I wanted to mention. Another thing is the issue that in the deen we have the issue of fahm, or the issue of fiqh. Fiqh means understanding. But there's a definition for the word fiqh that's very important. فهم مراد المتكلم. That's one definition for fiqh. Understand the intent of the speaker. You see, so when we talk about understanding and how it applies in this situation, in accepting and giving opinions, we're aiming at understanding the objective of the person speaking. The objective could be intellectual, they want to communicate an idea, or it could be feeling, right? They want to communicate a feeling, or they just want to be in your presence. So sometimes people don't realize that in the conversation, sometimes the person may not even be rational what they're saying, but they just want to connect with you. All they're doing is looking to connect with you. So we have to look at those different levels. It's not always agreeing in intellectually. Sometimes it's just about being in the presence. And sometimes a person, they just want to be valued. They know that they may not be able to contribute intellectually on a particular issue. They know that their ideas may not be suitable for the situation, but they want to feel that you still value them. Does that make sense or no? Does that make sense? How so? But in this particular, we have the قاعدة فاقد الشيء لا يعطي, that the person is deficient in something, they can't give that which they're deficient in. That's a principle in the Sharia. But the thing that, so we talked about preparing ourselves so that we can give more and more in the relationship, so that we can be there. But when we're talking about the issue of fiqh, in this case, we're talking about fiqh meaning understanding, because when we're speaking, when we're accepting and giving opinions, we have to, the understanding is the key. So we said that in the Islamic teachings, we have the idea of fiqh, understanding. One meaning of the word fiqh means understanding the objective or the purpose of the person as they're speaking. So then I was saying that sometimes people are speaking to communicate their ideas, and sometimes people are communicating their feelings, and sometimes people are just trying to connect. They may not be in a good place emotionally. They may not have something intellectually to contribute. They know they can't contribute on the conversation. But sometimes they may be talking just to connect, especially in this time where people are lonely. So part of understanding is to try to comprehend, to try to be clear, where's the other person coming from. Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's part of what a marriage should be about, synergizing. And when there's a disconnect in the marriage, you stop being able to read the other person. When there's solid synergy, you understand the other person without words. That's a high level. You can even anticipate what they're about to say. You understand what I'm saying? That's a high level of alignment in the relationship. That breaks down with sin. It breaks down with sin, violations of our relationship with each other, with Allah. It breaks down when there's no investment in the relationship. It breaks down when I'm collapsed in myself. Collapsed in myself meaning that I'm so caught up in my emotion with my situation that I begin to feel in a certain way. I begin to feel lonely. I begin to feel not loved. Yeah, and that's another issue, emotional fatigue. That physical fatigue and emotional fatigue. Emotional fatigue, I've been given and given and given and given and given and given and given, not only to this relationship but to others, and I'm burnt out and I can't give anymore, and I feel like no one loves me. That's a higher level of emotional fatigue, a deeper problem there. But physical fatigue too. I'm working, working, working. I'm dealing with the kids. I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with that. I'm tired. I can't be there. All of that has to be understood. All of that has to be understood. That's part of having empathy with each other. We're talking about sharing, accepting and sharing opinions. If we can't understand the humanity of the other person, it doesn't mean anything. You see what I'm saying? This is not business. This is not like I go into a store and I'm trying to figure out what is the price of this item and I want to see if I want to buy it. I want to see if I want to give from mine. I will accept your product and I will give you my money. You see, in that type of exchange. Listen, we're dealing with human beings. We're not talking about the exchange of objects. And in capitalism, where the lifestyle is mostly rooted on buying and selling and money, that is what has happened to love. We deal with each other in that way. We deal with each other like objects. That's studied. I'm not saying that I can't be open to change my opinion on that, but that has been studied solidly. You see what I'm saying? That we have turned our relationships into marketplace relationships. So we have turned our relationships into exactly what happens with trash. You know what happens with trash? You know what happens with trash? Trash is that which you no longer feel that is useful. So you throw it out. And that's what we do to people. When we don't feel that the other person is giving us the pleasure that we want and what we want, how we want it, the entertainment, what we wanted, the usefulness of we want, the utility, then we throw the other person out. Through divorce, through not giving them their rights, not giving them their attention, we become cruel to them. We do all kind of stuff. We push them out at levels, on different levels. And when it becomes even worse than that, it becomes abusive. When the violence comes in verbally and when it comes in physically, we dehumanize the other person. And some relationships, with all respect, to say this point, but it's important to say this. Some relationships, people are in those relationships only because of what they get out of it. The other human being does not exist. And that can be at multiple levels. Physical intimacy in its dynamics, or it could be because there's money involved, or it could be because of the relationship itself. Future expectations of benefit. That's not how the Muslim goes into a marriage. The Muslim goes into a marriage with the understanding that this is a relationship based on iman, it's based on seeking out the pleasure of Allah. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when he talked about the reasons for marriage, the highest degree or the highest reason is deen itself. People, and what he mentioned is why people go into marriages. But yeah, it's permissible. Islam doesn't لا يضيق على الواسع. The Islam doesn't just limit that which is, it's you have multiple choices there, but it guides us. So Islam is guiding us. Yes, people get married for beauty. Yes, people get married for wealth. They get married for lineage. But Islam is saying, what Islam guides us to in that, because human nature, people do that. They have their, intentions. But Islam guides us to marry for deen. So it encourages. Why? Because that's something that people have to take by what? They have to take by their decision. Now, if Islam said only marry for deen, then what will happen in that case is we'll open up the door to fitna and fasad. Tribulation of the people and hardship and corruption. Because then now, where people can be married and you decrease the corruption, especially corruption that comes from desire in different ways, you close the door. You get what I'm saying? You close the door. If you tell people only marry for deen, then that means, you leave the door open for all kinds of problems. So Islam is okay, fine. You want to marry for beauty, marry for beauty. But if you're just marrying for that, that's a problem. Know that there's going to be issues later on. Okay, marry for lineage, good family background, or wealth. Okay, but if you just marry for that, know that there's going to be a problem. So Islam is very wise, in the way that it approaches the human being. It's pushing you in a position where you should think about issues. and you should weigh the harm and the benefit. If you can bring those things together, that you're attracted to the person, that the person come from a established family, that that there's beauty, right? In that regard, that's the attraction. That the person comes from an established family, that comes for the issue of lineage. That there's wealth. If you can bring all those things together with deen, then you're in a good place. But if you have to pick one over the others, then the deen should be the common ground, or the final denominator, so to speak, or what guides the decision as a whole. Because you can marry a person that you're attracted to, they have no deen in sense of practice. They may be a Muslim shakliyan, just a Muslim at the face value. So then later on, you find that it's a dilemma with the lifestyle of this thing. You could be attracted to the person, right? But if the person doesn't take care of themselves, this, that, they have children, or the brother, doesn't take care of himself, then at the end of the day, that whole handsome and the whole she's beautiful, mashallah, and all that, it goes out the door with age and time and this, that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be attracted to the person. But if you just, and the person could be shallow, they could be beautiful, but no intellect, no spirituality, no depth, no concern. It's about them. They could be egoistic. So Islam, puts things in its proper place in that regard. So she talks about the whole issue of listening and the importance of it. We have to realize that listening, we talked about that in the past, but we have to realize that differences come up. So we have to have an understanding of how do we deal, with the issue of differences. That we have to look for the common ground. We have to look to what are real points of difference and why there's differences. So when we're accepting and sharing opinions, if we're doing that because there's differences, it shouldn't just be the issue that we just differ on everything. No, the first thing that you should be looking at is, what do we agree to? What's the common ground? Then we look at, okay, where's the points that we differ on? Why do we differ? That's methodological. There's a concept that's called al-khilaf al-tanawu' wal-khilaf al-tadad, which the khilaf al-tanawu' is just like, okay, we see things in a different way, no problem. Khilaf al-tadad means that at the core we differ. This is an issue which we solidly differ. It's a big problem. It's not just the issue of your that's a perspective. We can see it that way. I can see it that way, and then you're holding on to your opinion and the other person is holding on to their opinion. Either way, any opinion can go. You know what I'm saying? It's not an issue so that's important to understand when we're accepting and sharing opinions. So we talked about the importance of understanding where people are coming from, their backgrounds. We talked about the importance of gratitude for the person in your life, honoring the person. We talked about the importance of understanding where the person is coming from, when they speak. Then we talked about that when we're speaking with each other and we're accepting and giving opinions and so on and so forth, that we should always look for that common ground. And if differences come up, we should understand why. And we should understand before that, what type of difference is it? Is it just differences of opinion? Okay. You can look at it 1,000 different ways. Or is it actual difference that's a problem that's going to disrupt the relationship? And there's a lot of issues like that can come up. And that needs its own discussion, right? That needs its own discussion. Like for instance, those hardcore differences, like for instance, could be that you automatically take a new job and you didn't say anything. You took on debt. You decide to leave the religion that you're in. You decide that you're going to use birth control, both males and females. And there was this understanding that we're going to have a baby. And then all of a sudden, the other person is not in a position to have a baby. Those are major decisions. Those are issues which, if there's differences in that, it's not easy to move forward. You're going to have a family member come and live with you. Complete lifestyle change. You went and you bought something and you invested in something and it has an impact on the relationship. Like, for instance, property in another country. Or you're sending money, like what happens in the Muslim community. We send money to our relatives overseas and it has an impact on the family, and we're hiding that. And then it comes to the fore, and we're talking about it, we're sharing and taking opinions on it. But what? That's a core reality, that you may have one idea about it, the other person may have another idea about it. And if there's no understanding in that regard, that could be a big problem. She puts having a pet. That's true. Having a pet may seem something light, but some Muslims, they're at the point where they, for instance, the issue of dogs. One wants the dog, the other one doesn't want the dog, and it becomes a religious conflict for them. That issue of the dog and the purity of the saliva is not issue. And the Maliki madhab is considered pure. Majority of the madhab is considered impure. But the issue is that that's what we're talking about. That people, there's different positions on that and cultural differences on that. And people decide to bring in a pet and they think it's a light issue. Oh, why are you doing, why are you getting mad? No, yeah, that's a big issue. That's not a small issue, because of the impact that type of decision has. So listening and accepting and sharing opinions all goes together based on what we said. Right? Based on what we said. And we review again. Accepting and sharing opinions needs listening. Okay? We have to understand the background of the person, where they're coming from. It could be background from the family background, educational background, even their personal traumas, issues that they have gone through, what's going on in the workplace. It could be the past or the present, but we have to understand the background. The other issue is that we have to have some sense of gratitude for that person being, in our lives. Honoring that person. You see what I mean? We also, when we're sharing opinions, we have to realize it's one thing to share opinions. It's another thing to be knowledgeable about it. And we have to talk about also where when we share opinions, if it falls into conflict. But that brings us to the point that there's some issues that you can look at it from multiple ways. It's not a big deal. Yeah, it's a different way of seeing. And then some things are core differences. Like where we differ on this issue is problematic. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big issue. Family planning is a massive issue. And so when there's disagreements on that and you're sharing opinions, that's why it's important to understand where the other person is coming from. The other person and it may take some time. Let's use that as a case scenario. Family planning. The other person may have had childhood experiences which are a problem, in which how they saw their siblings were raised. And they may have even helped raise their siblings, and so they want to delay the whole issue of marriage. I mean, the whole issue of having children in marriage. That's one angle. The other angle is that if that's the case, and the spouse doesn't realize that causes stress for that person, they may think is personal. One person in another scenario may want a child because they want to bond and they want to be connected to the person. Like people that have gotten divorced and then they get remarried and they want to feel connected to that new person. They have children with the other person, but they want to have children with this new person. The other person is not ready for that. or the other person may have had an issue in the relationship before, and they don't want to be tied at that level, because they still haven't healed 100%. See what I'm saying? Now that underlying all that accepting and giving opinions is all that other stuff. But that red flag issue, there's two things: red flags before the relationship is established, and red flags in the relationship or in a situation. But that's why the issue of Muslims learning how to prepare for marriage is of the utmost importance, because we still have a concept of compatibility, which was like an idea and a practice that was used in the past, where society, where everybody lived together, they knew each other, they knew families, families, they knew your grandfather's grandfather. That was known in the family, in the village or in the society. We don't live in those type of societies. So we're basically coming to each other with all kinds of experiences and situations, right? And that's the problem with online marriage. That's the problem of not having community. When you're in a community, people see you with frequency, so they believe me, everybody's reading you. They see certain things about you. But when you're not a part of a community, nobody knows your family, nobody knows anything, and then you're on these Muslim dating apps and you create this profile, and it may not really be you, or you see what I'm saying? Compatibility has to be re-looked at. We have to look at it again, because the Muslims are thinking that, oh well, in Islam it says you have to hurry up and get married, and you don't even have an understanding of the other person. People rush into the marriage, whether they are, I know situations where people that have never been married before, they use those Muslim dating apps, they jump into the marriage, and they go against their family and everything like that, or they don't tell them, they jump into it and it becomes a disaster. Or they've been married before, this, that, and they just keep jumping in and out of relationships. That issue of marrying someone and you don't really have an understanding of where their personality is at, where their mental health is at, where the family is at. Yeah, yeah, yeah. How they deal with the family, how not only the family, how they deal with people, even sometimes how they deal with pets, how they deal with animals. In social work, one of the things that was kicked off in social work was to understand that there's red flags if a family or something like that has a pet and is abused. They don't take care of this, that. So it's a red flag. So the point being overall, so we don't go too far, is that the background of the person has to be understood. And many times you can understand the background of the person, but the Muslims don't look at mental health. So they look at the family, they look at the education, they look at the mahar, they look at this, but they don't look at mental health. And so I had put it here, like how you handle ideas, how you understand crisis, how you deal with conflict, how you major decision make. Those are things that you have to look at in the first stage before you get married. No, they're not red flags. It's not red flags. We don't want to put it as red flags. We're talking about compatibility, because it could be a maturity issue. Doesn't mean that it's something that is a negative. It could be an area where the person has to grow in. And it's the same thing in the marriage. Because some people see red flags where there is no red flags, from the angle that it could be a red flag to them, but it could be an issue that you can correct, or it could be an issue that you can develop. You see what I mean? We don't want to be 100% that everything is we're on guard. It's like, oh, that type of approach. People won't get married like that. I guarantee you they won't get married, because they'll be so scared. We have to learn what it is that we can work with. And the other person has to prove that they want to be in the relationship. People can be no red flags from the beginning, No red flags later on, but they have characteristics that they don't value the other person. You understand what I'm saying? They have characteristics where they're not grateful for this person being in my life. That it's about them. You see what I'm saying? And that develops more and more over time. And in the beginning, there was no red flags. There was nothing. It's the characteristics that we bring to the relationship that we need. You have to know what you can deal with in the other person, because if you're expecting the person to change, that's not going to be resolved. Some things that are set in a person's persona, personality, the character is stable. Character can change, but it's difficult with time. Habit can change, but it's difficult the older you get. You see what I'm saying? So the mistake that we make is that we don't know how to enter into the relationship. Right? We don't do the work when it comes to the background stuff. And like I said, we leave out the mental health stuff. So when that comes up, we're thinking that it's the person, when in reality the person has a condition. How many relationships have existed and do exist where one person in the relationship flips out and everyone thinks is the person, but they have bipolar disorder or something like that? You see what I'm saying? And it comes out in a crisis. It didn't come out before. It comes out with postpartum. No, the postpartum is after the giving of birth. It comes out in stress situations. It comes out with the job loss. So that reality, is very important, that we're studying what we can deal with, and we have to have that openness, right? We have to have that commitment that what we want to work with, and we're gonna end this. We have to have that commitment that we want to work with each other, that we want to be in the relationship, that we want to continue to grow. The problem is we think that we already we think that we don't have to do work in the relationship. We think that we don't have to grow. We think we don't have to change. We think that the relationship should be perfect without investing in it. She talks about the issue of joint decision making. I just want to cover these things, and then we can end. And I tried to talk about that already. That, okay, for instance, when we're trying to come to a decision and we're sharing our opinions, some things we have to know. Like, some things are okay, we can let it go. It's not a really big deal. Like, what restaurant are we going to go to? But then other things like moving, or other things like taking on debt, that's something which we need. We need more thought in. But even, to be honest with you, if the relationship is in a bad place, and we're talking about going to a restaurant, and if we're not considering the other person, and the other person is like, that person is always picking where to go. They never ask me real. You see what I'm saying? Where we negate the other person. Manners is good. It's important. But on a deeper level of manners is considering the other person. We live in an individualistic society. Everyone wants their opinion regarded, respected, heard. We don't live in a society of sacrifice and commitment to the group. We live in an individualistic society where it's even more complicated. Why? Because we have a lot of emotions. So a lot of us expect that every emotion that we have has to be catered to. That doesn't work like that. Every emotion that we have can't be catered to in a relationship. It's impossible. We have to have key emotions like respect, like love, like honoring, like care, like those types of things. Yes, we go into that. But every emotion, every expectation, every desire, you can't, there's impossible for that to be pursued in a relationship. We have to learn how to tone down some emotions. And that goes for a psychology orientation. But this society, we don't realize that it has given us a certain way of looking at the world where it's all about our ideas. It's all about how I feel. The more rational you are, the more is about my ideas. The more about how I feel is more about emotion. And some people have the mix of both. So we have to realize that's why we're having issues in our relationships. Before, in the past, it was the issue. We're just committed. You do your part, I do my part. I don't have to necessarily like you. You know what I'm saying? It's like we're married and that's it. But now the whole issue of, oh, do you like me? You know what I'm saying? And that comes from the brother and the sister. Don't think that I'm saying that as a sister. If you have some brothers that they're emotionally in a place, where it's like so vulnerable and sensitive. And then you have some sisters where they're just business. They don't share any emotion. They don't break. And so these are issues that we have. So when we talk about making joint decisions, we have to understand what it is that we're talking about, and what we have to talk about, what level it is. I just don't want to say that, okay, joint decisions sometimes, yes, where we go to eat. If the relationship is in a bad place, of course people are going to be sensitive. That's going to be a point of fighting. But that we can't always we can let that go. But joint decisions, one person can make the decision, okay, not so much of a big deal. It becomes a big deal if there's unresolved problems, but a big deal is major decisions. And people like to be consulted. I had a case where that was the major issue with the sister, and the brother would say, the joint decision part became confusing for them, and we probably have to talk about that in another session. Why? Because then the brother started saying, well, what's my responsibility in the marriage? What about when there's differences? How do we resolve the differences? Where's the issue of qawama? The issue of the leadership of the man and the responsibility of the man. You know what I'm saying? She wants her every decision to be heard on every issue. And he's like, I'm lost as to what to do. You see what I'm saying? So the joint decision making, we have to be clear that there's certain things we can let go. Certain things that, and I had actually wrote about that. There's certain things which are, already situations where there's an understanding of how that should work. You may have to, here it goes right here, when it comes to mutual agreement. Certain matters are understood. They were discussed in the past. Yes, you may have to revisit them, but you kind of have an understanding of how that goes. So you don't need to have a discussion on it. You don't need to share a lot of opinions on it. There's those types of things in a relationship. It's just understood. Then there's agreements, actual agreements that have been made. It's not just the issue that's just understood. Okay, you go that way, you do your thing, I do my thing. No, but actual agreements. We agreed to do this. You see what I'm saying? We planned on it, and so now the question is, do you follow through or not? Then there's major issues which come up. Now we have to discuss them. So when we're doing mutual agreement stuff, mutual consultation, we have to know what category we're putting it in. And listen, and we close with this. We're going to have to come back next week if Allah allows. The issue of mutual consultation or shura is a problem in the ummah overall. If we don't get this right in the family, we will never get it right in politics. We won't get it right in our institutions. It has to start in the family. And there's many examples where Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is making shura with human beings. Of those examples is like, for instance, the issue of the angels being talked to and spoken to about the creation of the human being. Imam Tahir ibn Ashur, he mentions that as a point of shura. So he mentions that as a model of the Quran to say that, yes, you may have unequal statuses between people, but that doesn't mean that you cancel them out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no equal, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this case showed us the precedent of a being that's superior consulting with a being that's inferior, doesn't have the same status. So sometimes even parents think that they don't have to consult their children. Some men that grow up in male, masculine, dominant societies, they silence the women, and she mentions that. And some women that become, they grow up generationally where the women are dominant, they silence the man. But it doesn't have to be a tit for tat equal thing. It has to be the issue that We have to realize in a marriage, responsibility is one thing, but dominance to cancel out the other person, that's a problem. Leadership is one thing, but belittling the other person, that's a problem. So if Allah Ta'ala can model shura between beings that are unequal, then what about a marriage where we should be compatible to each other and we have equal dignity? You see what I'm saying? That's what we're missing. So in sharing and accepting opinions, we have to create that culture of respect. We have to create that culture of honoring the other person, that culture of gratitude. That's all rooted in the deen. And we even have to learn how to exchange opinions. Some situations of exchanging opinions is just exchanging opinions. In others, we're coming to an agreement on an issue. And what is agreed to is binding. So we need to learn what type of conversations we're having with each other. That's important at the end of the day. We have to make that intention clear. Here, I'm just looking for your opinion. It's what you think of. Here, I'm looking for your opinion because I want to make a decision. Here, I want us to make a decision together. You see, when we start on that level where we're clarifying why it is that we're talking, I hate to use this word, but what's the agenda? You understand what I'm saying? Then it becomes easier to share opinions and so on and so forth. But we should also have a general flow where we're talking to each other, but we don't. There was a study, I never looked at how accurate it was, but it was used in the business world, that the average family is not even doing 5 minutes of talking a day. How true that is, Allahu A'lam, has to be researched. But when you look at the reality of how we're on our phones and you look at the reality of how we're in our world and busy, there's that most of us are not connecting with conversations overall. So that has to be settled first. And until next time, أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم والحمد لله رب العالمين. We ask Allah to guide us and to grant us understanding and to bring our hearts close together. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.